Hello, Jason Roberts. I am a founder of an organization called the Better Block that was started up in Oak Cliff, so not very far from here. And I do a lot of work in cities where we go in and we rapidly do what we call urban prototyping or retrofitting of the built environment to try to fix issues. We go to find places that have got blight and disinvestment, and we've had a pretty interesting time learning things from around the world with this work. But my background was not that I was an urban planner or an architect, which is what I do now regularly. My background was actually I sat in rooms that looked like this, that were cold and full of cables and wires. I used to fix computers for a living. So I didn't have much of a social life during the day, but at night, my one kind of cool factor was I played in rock bands. And with the rock bands, I'd go around oftentimes and play in different, usually the bad parts of town in cities around the country, and get to know the artist communities and see how artists were oftentimes the ones that were helping lead the charge to fix places that had problems. And usually they had no money, so they were doing a lot of things with very little. And I was really excited to see a lot of those things. But a lot of our work also came from this idea of having conversations with my parents and hearing about how things used to be done in their cities growing up. So I would hear about the little main streets they'd have with the parades, and everybody knew the local pharmacist, and everybody knew the local kind of cafeteria owner. Everybody looked out for the kids, and they were all friends. And I saw these kind of environments and these kind of stories, and I looked around at the way I was raised and said, I didn't have anything like this. I grew up in environments that looked like this, that had these shopping strips that were full of chain stores, grocery stores, and little like pizzerias and things like that people that didn't really want to work there. They're often kind of the high school kids that was just kind of they were shift leaders. There was no pride in the place, and a lot of frustration from folks in my community because we had nothing to really celebrate in our neighborhoods. And so I started trying to figure out, well, where is change happening? What are things that are going around the country right now, the world, where I can see actually things moving the dial forward? And outside of looking at Europe and places like that, I also started seeing kind of these new innovative projects happening. Like I saw parking days where people would take parking lots and turn them, or parking spaces, and turn them into these little tiny public spaces that were green. They just feed the meters. As opposed to putting cars there, they'd make them into little parking spaces for humans. And then I'd see in New York where they're transforming their roadways from cars and making them more centric for people. So that way, these were now becoming these cafe dining experiences. So seeing these things and seeing the new bike infrastructure projects and thinking like, I want to take on these things in my own neighborhood. I'll go to City Hall and I'll say, look what's happening in New York, what's happening in San Francisco, and I've got a great idea. We're going to take all of the roads we have in our city here in Dallas, and we'll cut them in half, and we'll add bike lanes, and we'll do cafe seating and make a lot of great things happen. And I found when you're the person that shows up to the City Hall and you say those things, you'll see a lot of people that look like this come out and say, no, absolutely not. You're not going to cut our roads in half. You're not going to change the life as we know it, because it's going to be Carmageddon. Business is going to slow to a crawl. I won't be able to drive everywhere I'm used to driving. And so at some point I realized I'm probably not going to convince this guy to ever ride a bicycle or get out into a cafe seeing environment. So with our work, we started looking at ways that we could transform places rapidly and just have the conversation of how do we fix things on our own. Our first project that we did was what we called, again, the Better Block, where we took a blighted block in our neighborhood that was, had a one-way street that was high speed with thin sidewalks, no landscaping, empty buildings. We had a lot of ordinances that made it either cost prohibitive or illegal to do cool things. So flowers on the sidewalk was $1,000 in permitting. Crowds on the street were actually illegal, so you couldn't have crowds gather. So we had all kinds of things that were killing our street life. So we took a crowd of people in our community, and we said, what can we do over a weekend to make this the place we wish we always had? So we just basically took a weekend and we broke every law we could. We painted our own bike lanes, we added our own cafe seating, we thinned the streets, we painted murals on the buildings, and we took the empty buildings and we put the businesses that we wish we always had. So coffee shops, flower shops, bike shops. We printed off all the laws and rules we were breaking, and we put them in the windows. And we invited our city staff and our mayor out and expecting to go to jail, and find out that actually people said, this is much better. We'd much rather have places like this in our neighborhood. And then afterwards, we had businesses stick that we created temporarily that were like art stores and bike shops and things like that were now successful and seated in our neighborhood. And beyond that, we started seeing the ordinances that we had challenged in our projects get changed. So we had these rules and these things that were people saying that it was going to be too cost prohibitive. Or now, so it's no longer $1,000 to put cafe seating out. Now it's $100. And so this little project that we did that was a guerrilla art project turned into something that kind of transformed our neighborhood in pretty short order. And then beyond that, people asked us, like, what happens when you break all those laws and rules? This is my friend Scott, who helped me print off all the laws and rules. He's now our city council member. So I found you can break a lot of laws, and there's a one-to-one correlation between breaking laws and becoming a public servant. But beyond that, I found that whenever I was studying this work and getting deeper, because we started that in 2010, and then as I started learning more and learning urban planning and architecture, I started figuring out that the places that we love often had a very similar form. They looked like places like this. So buildings built to the sidewalk, thin streets, beautifully landscaped, and little places that were built before cars. And the thing is, the places that we love around the world all have this general form. We've been building this for about 10,000 years. So in Rome, in Paris, in San Francisco, in New York, even here in Dallas, Fort Worth, and Arlington, the places that you want to spend time in and hang out look a lot like this. They're at what people call human scale, or this little intimate scale. And what it turns out is that these things that we've learned just scientifically as I started doing research is that humans actually prefer to be places that have edges next to them, that they like walls. And sociologists would study this, and even you study a dance room, people go to the edges often of a room. And when you go to the center of a space that is exposed, people they don't feel right. And this is kind of wired up into our DNA for thousands of years, or tens of thousands of years, where at some point in time, our ancient ancestors were probably being snatched up by pterodactyls. So they fled to the edges, and they looked for these trees and things that were at the edge that they could climb up and scurry up really quickly. Well, scientists have studied this, and they recognize that there's actually a term they call thigmotaxis, which means how animals respond to stimuli around them and what they do. In fact, what we've learned is that rats, when they do experiments, will be naturally anxious when they're in the middle of an open space. So they'll quickly run to a wall. But the way that we test out anti-anxiety medications like Prozacs and things like that is by injecting them into these rats. And if they move away from the wall and out to the center, they then feel they have less anxiety if the drugs are working. So really what all that tells us is that all these things that we're making, these anti-anxiety medications and things like that, are just being made really so we get okay with having environments that look like this, really. So I realized with our work, we had to figure out how do we take places like this and rapidly transform them into the places that people love, right? Those great old historic walls that we walk beside that are contiguous, that are long. And so we've gotten into projects, and we started saying, like, we need to just start thinking small. Dallas's motto is think big. We do large things. We spend $100 million on a giant bridge. We spend $100 million on a convention center hotel, but the reality is that the places that we love have 100 little things. So a little cafe, a little flower shop, bike lanes, public benches, lighting, kiosks, maps, all of those things. And as a community, we can build 100 little things a lot faster than we can do these one giant off things that may fail, and if they fail, they bring everything down around them. And we found that with our work, we can use simple tools at the hardware store to change an environment. So we can take white duct tape and reline the streets so it looks like there's new paint on the ground, so the car lanes get thinner. We can take shade cloth and make bike lanes. We can take spray chalk. We can go out and take straw wattles that they use to keep trash out of the gutters during construction, and we can make new curbs so that cars will make serpentine motions as opposed to going straight and fast. And then we can landscape them. And then we could take those wraps that they put on buses as advertising and make new crosswalks. And we can go to the city, and when the city says it's going to take us millions of dollars and years to figure out how to kind of fix this one intersection, we can get some friends together and we can do it in a few hours like this. And this is what we do all the time now with our work, with the Better Block. And we do this all over the country and all over the world. This happens everywhere. And again, it started here. And people ask me, how do you guys get away with breaking all these laws and rules in broad daylight? And we said we found we can break any law or rule we want as long as we wear an orange vest. So what I found, though, was with our work was I would look at pictures like this, and I would show these to audiences like this, and I would say, I look at this and I say, I wish I lived in a place that had this. I wish this was in my neighborhood. I'd want to grow old here. I'd walk here every day for coffee. I'd put it on postcards. I want my kids to work here someday. And then when I'd show other friends and ask them what do they think about places like this, they said, yes, we wish we had this in our neighborhood too. This is gorgeous. The scale is beautiful. It's got small streets. It's landscaped. It has this old form on one side, and it's got newer buildings as well. It's all mixed in. It's got this interesting clutter. So I'd say, well, if we know collectively that we all wish we had places that look like this, then why do we keep building places that look like this? And that was the big realization for our work, was that we can transform things. We can make these look like the other thing pretty quickly with our community, because the other places are places that we're proud of, that we want to celebrate, that we want to show off to our friends, and that we want to actually have people come and gather around. These are places that actually put us down, bring us down, don't make us feel pride. They don't make us feel like we have a place that matters. So again, with our work, we look at grocery stores and figure out, like, how do we crunch this grocery store down that's abandoned? This is a project we did in Denton, Texas. And we worked with the community. It was an old Piggly Wiggly store. We said, how do we make this like an old Main Street like you'd find in Paris, right? And so we would kind of drop some renderings and say, we could take billboards and we could paint them, and we could use scaffolding to make new storefronts. The kids need a place to it gets hot outside, so we'll build a hay bale water pool, and then we'll go out and we'll build parklets or decks, and we'll bring food trucks, and we'll make a new wall so we can make that grocery store that was barren and empty and cold and make it to a place that's alive, that looks just like a Main Street. And again, this was a project that we did just a few years ago here, just north of us. What I learned also was looking at places that were rapidly transformed and understanding the people that had to be involved with making change. There's a story that I was fascinated by, though, was the story of Napoleon being exiled. And people may not know, but Napoleon was exiled twice in his life. The first time, before he was exiled to St. Helena forever, he was exiled to an island called the Isle of Elba off of Italy. And he was given sovereignty over this island of 30,000 people that were in poverty and in squalor. And he gets to the island, and he looks around, and he's bored. And he's trying to focus on the quality of life of the community and how to fix things. And he starts thinking, like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and update the educational curriculum because the school is outdated. And then we're going to go ahead and update the farming methods, because your farming methods are outdated as well. We'll get you guys working and producing wheat faster and better. And then we're going to find, we found that there's iron mines that used to exist from prehistoric times. Let's get the iron mines working again, so you have natural resources that could be mined as well. So we'll have money coming in. And then he creates an army with his spare time. And then after that, he creates a navy, and he gets himself off the island and becomes Emperor of France again. And he does all of that in 300 days. And so the realization for me was it just takes this one person who can fire up a community and let them know that you have everything you need to make a great place. It just has to be organized, and it has to be set into action. We found projects that we'd work on, we'd get brought in. In fact, we had a city council member come to us that were frustrated with, in the city of Dallas, the plan to do a park in the Trinity River. And then that project kind of got hijacked by a toll road initiative that's still going through all of these initiatives. And the city council member was frustrated. She came to our team and said, how could you help us? Because now it's 20 years on, they're spending billions of dollars, nothing is happening. We want things to happen in the space so people can use it now as a park. They started showing the toll road maps and how it's hijacking this plan. They said, and then the people that are talking about the park, they're just talking about doing these expensive things like kayaking and these umbrellas that are solar powered at night that kind of come up, that create all this light and all this. And we just want a trail. How do we get a trail down here? So we assembled our team and said, you know what? If we can't get a trail, the city's not going to build us a trail. We'll just go out with a bunch of riding lawnmowers and we'll cut trails ourselves. And we told the city, don't worry, we've got it taken care of. We're going to make our own trail system. And then we started mowing them down in the city. And this is what the trails look like after we started to cut them through. And then told the city had people come and introduce them to this space. And at that point, we realized the city was like, wait, you can't be building trails without us. This can't go on. We have to get involved with this process. And then in short order, the council members found funds. They redirected to the initiative. And then we got trails throughout our Trinity River. So this happened, again, from a year and a half after we had developed this project, you started seeing concrete getting laid on the ground. So we saw action happening rapidly. We also started developing these bike initiatives and trying to figure out how do we get people to bicycle throughout our communities, right? We created our Bike-Friendly Oak Cliff group to fight for bike lanes and things like that. But we also had to realize the psychology of the city was we had city council members saying, yeah, we want bike infrastructure, but for the most part, and we're telling our group that, hey, I'm for this, but then they're telling other developers, like, don't worry, I won't build bike lanes. It's going to take away your parking. I don't want to do that. So we weren't hearing these conversations. So once we find out that the city council members were actually telling two different stories to us and to the developers, we went in we present giant checks and say, hey, here's money to build that bike lane, and now you have to publicly own this in front of people. So other city council members gather and they celebrate and say, hey, we're getting bike lanes, and everyone's proud of that initiative. So you have to understand human psychology of how we have to get these things done. We also have to tell, whenever Bicycling Magazine came to our city and said, hey, we see things are happening, you're doing things, we should rate you guys a good bicycling city. What do you think? And they came to me and I said, make us the worst city for bicycling. I don't want to be the best because we are not doing enough things fast enough. So they did. They published that we're the worst city for bicycling. My friends got mad at me. My friends, oh, how could you do this? We're doing all this work. This is actually hurting us. But what happened was the city saw this and said, we don't want to be the worst of anything. And in fast order, we went from having no bike infrastructure to this is a bike lane that I helped design. So we got things happening because we told people that things are horrible here, and they were bad, and people started making changes. Now we're doing work in other cities. This is a project we're doing in Akron, Ohio. It's got wide streets that are gray, cold, empty buildings as well, and trying to study the neighborhood and figure out what are the assets. And we're learning we have immigrants here. We have Bhutanese people. We have Italian immigrants that were here 100 years ago. And we're drawing maps, and we're saying, let's thin the streets. Let's add bike lanes. Let's add Italian piazzas. Let's do bocce courts. Let's go in and make Bhutanese restaurants. And then we're making classes and workshops for the neighborhood to come in and help us build these things so they can take part in changing their environment. We're filling and we're doing this temporarily so it doesn't scare anybody and say that's going to change the world forever. But once they see the change and they experience it, they can actually fight for these things afterwards. So this is us working with city staff, filling their paint machines with kids' finger paint, basically, tempera paint, and then lining it with white duct tape because it looks real. And then at the end of that, it looks just like a bike lane you'd see in Portland. And we're lining those with street trees. And afterwards, we're putting mid-block crossings down. We're taking empty parking lots that have been barren for a long time and saying, how do we make an Italian-informed piazza that's inspired by these 2,000, 3,000-year-old designs? We gather hay bales, 2,000 tons of dirt, and in 2.5 hours, I can make it look like this. And this is how we transform a place with a community rapidly. We can make bocce ball courts in the street. We can go in and take old trash and turn it into decks so kids can sit outside. We can take empty buildings and make bike shops, some businesses that were built from locals in the neighborhood, and this is what that street looks like. This is really used. This is not a Photoshop image. Those are real people. This is a real neighborhood celebrating in the streets together. And then we publish those recipes online so everybody can take part and do these things with us because we want this to propagate. We want other cities to do this all over the place. And now we're getting involved with digital fabrication. So you see the Fab Lab outside back. Know that we're developing our own makerspace in Oak Cliff right now that's going to be focused on urban design and urban planning. So people can come in and start helping us rebuild the parts of our city that are broken. Build new buildings, new shops, build decks outside, build cafe seating. We're taking empty houses in places like Akron, Ohio that has depopulation, and we're turning them with refugees into Airbnbs that have Bhutanese flair. So people can come in and have Bhutanese tea, Bhutanese naming ceremonies, and go and celebrate and stay the night with a Bhutanese family. And those better blocks that we started in 2010 just to help fix our own neighborhood started going all over the country. And then another year, it started going around the world. It went from Australia to Tehran, Iran. So these are happening everywhere, and people are excited about this change. For me, I got so excited about what was happening that I thought, wow, like we started getting awards. We started getting awards from the White House, started lecturing at Harvard, having dinners with Michelle Obama, getting in the Venice Biennale. I decided to run for U.S. Congress because I had a free April. And so at that point, I thought, what can stop us, right? We figured out these ways to make transformation quick in our neighborhood. And the one thing that stopped me dead in my tracks was I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer in 2012. But when I was at my sickest and I needed help, at that point I thought, I'm not gonna go and see my blocks. I'm not gonna get to ride on these bike lanes and what was all this for? My neighborhood that helped me fix all of these places with the Better Block gathered around me and started doing these Build a Better Jason campaigns to help fix me. So what I got at the end of all this work was a neighborhood. And that's what we're all fighting for. All this stuff is so the bike lanes, the cafes, and everything, those happen in great places where people feel good and they feel connected and they feel a sense of belonging because we all want that. And that's what we should all be fighting from here on out. Thank you.